Welcome to Novelist Spotlight, the podcast where published fiction writers are interviewed to gather their insights and writing lessons so we can use them to make ourselves better and more effective writers. There are just 3 things I ask of you, if appropriate to you and your experience. Please subscribe, please click on the like button, and please share this program link with any family members, friends, or colleagues who might be interested or benefit from the content. Now, on with our program. This is Mike Conkley, your host, and the spotlight is James N. Frey, an internationally known creative writing instructor and a workshop leader. In fact, many of the participants at his workshops have gone on to publish with major New York houses and received major advances as high as $2 million, and also many have received much critical acclaim. In his own right, though, James N. Frey is the author of the widely read book, How to Write a Damn Good Novel. That is the book that got me interested in having James on the program. I read that years ago, and like most of you, I've read countless books about writing. And I'm not saying this to flatter our guest. I truly will tell you that is the best book I have read about writing a novel. And what we're going to seek to do here is gather some of his many insights. Now, that's the first of several books he wrote about writing. In fact, it became kind of a franchise because that was followed with How to Write a Damn Good Novel 2, the sequel, followed by The Key, Writing Damn Good Fiction Using the Power of Myth. He also wrote one titled How to Write a Damn Good Mystery. So, in his own right, though, he's also an award-winning... Go ahead, James.
How to Write a Damn Good
Thriller?
Yeah.
Okay, there you have it. How to Write a Damn Good Thriller.
None of the other books do as well as the first one. The first one continues to sell. It's amazing. It's been in print since 1984, and it continues to sell extremely well. In fact, I just sold it to China. It's doing great, despite the fact that the works that I cite in that book as examples are never read anymore. So it doesn't seem to matter.
How many languages? How many languages has it been translated into?
Oh, I don't know.
A bunch.
I can just say that it does. Well, what happened was I sold this book, and first of all I wrote it. I was teaching. I rented a room at the YWCA in San Francisco, and I was teaching a class there, and I would go around and hang up notices on telephone poles, to get students. And I was teaching at this class at the YWCA, and I would pass out. I would write like little essays about point of view, or those kinds, different aspects of novel writing, and then. I sent them to my agent, and I said, this could be a book. We could sell it as a book. And she said, listen, she says, every creative writing teacher in the country who teach at Harvard and Yale and Princeton, they all write a book, So the competition is unbelievable. Nobody's going to want to get a book from a guy that's teaching the YWCA, I said, look, just send it in and see what happens.
Way to be assertive, James. I love it.
And two publishers wanted it. And she said the one that she picked because they had a tendency to keep it in print, So that's why they got picked. And it's been in print since '84.
Well, let me tell you why this book was the best I've ever read, James. I just felt as though what you wrote, you created structure. And without structure, of course, the carpentry, interior design, the artwork, none of that holds it together without the structure. And you laid it out in such a easy to understand and methodical method that I just walked away from there feeling like I was much more in command of what I was trying to do. Because one of the hardest things, I wrote myself into a corner on the first 2 novels I tried to write because I was trying to do it organically and I didn't have enough instruction, frankly. And that book was, again, the best that I've ever read and on the subject. And I do want our listeners, though, to know that you're also an award-winning playwright and the author of 9 novels, including The Long Way to Die, which was nominated for an Edgar Award by the Mystery Writers of America, and Winter of the Wolves, a Literary Guild selection. So you're a novelist and a playwright. And before you started writing about how to write novels and so on, talk a little bit about your workshops, because you've been doing these workshops for years to good result. And I think that where I wanted to start off with that is just in terms of the aspiring novelists that you see in your workshops, what's the biggest issue most of them are facing? What do you see as the biggest problem?
Lack of conflict. They don't quite get the idea of conflict, and oftentimes they have no conflict, or like instead of having dialogue, which is conversation and conflict, they just have conversation. It's lack of conflict, I think, is the biggest problem, especially with women. Women are taught, don't have conflict. Women are taught by their mothers, don't have conflict, don't avoid it. And they in life, and then they avoid it in their work. Right now, I'm working with a novelist in Portland, Oregon, and she's written about as good a novel as I've ever read. She's putting she's going through and correcting all the misspelled words and stuff right now to get ready to submit it. And she published a couple of pretty good detective novels, and now this is a kind of a thriller. It's really a terrific book, and I hope that it'll really be. I don't want to tell her that though, because a lot of people are terrified when they think of this. If they have success, they're going to lose all their friends.
Right. Well, wasn't Larry McMurtry wrote the book, All My Friends Are Going to Be Strangers, and I'm not sure if that's exactly what he meant, or what he meant was, I'm going to be holed up in a room by myself, so I'm not going to have any friends. Or I'm going to offend them all because I'm going to use some kind of composite or something recognizable in the book, and they're going to get pissed off at me. Who knows? But let me stick with this conflict theme for a minute. Isn't it true that conflict does not necessarily mean murder, mayhem? It doesn't necessarily mean marital strife.
Right.
It can be, conflict can be much subtler than that, correct? Can you give a couple examples where there's conflict, but it's subtle?
It's an opposition of wills. That's the way I try to put it, Conflict is an opposition of wills. So like a guy climbing a mountain, the mountain doesn't want to be climbed, It's an opposition of wills, It's conflict.
Or the old man in the sea, where it's the old man out on a boat trying to catch a fish. Yeah.
Right.
And conflict with himself, conflict with the sea, conflict with survival, for crying out loud. So if conflict
a lot of people misunderstand that word conflict, and especially with women, it's a problem. Men, usually they have tons of conflict, but they have, the writing is crude, let's put it that way. When I first started teaching, I thought I'd have maybe one good writer out of 100. The truth of the matter is that most people are very good at writing. Most even beginners, they can really write pretty well. You don't have to teach them grammar; they really know. I don't do much teaching anymore, but I'm getting kind of up there. I'm almost 80. I still have workshops up in Portland once in a while, because I've worked with those people up there for 30 years or so. And
those people, I mean, what is it? Powell's books or what?
No, it's at a private home on the. She's right on the Columbia River.
Oh wow!
She has a. It's not a mobile home, but it's a manufactured house.
Mm-hmm.
Really kind of nice, and we have workshops there.
So let me ask you, let's get a little bit more microcosmic. So you've got a writer, they understand conflict, they've got it in there, and it's not crude, and it's not overly subtle to the point where it's you don't even sense it as conflict, but they're dealing with a scene, and the scene's not working. You must run into this a lot where they're asking you for some help there. What advice would you give writers just in terms of a scene is not working? And I realize that it's not the same as when you're there and looking at it and you can diagnose it, but generally speaking...
I think that...
Go ahead.
That's one of those weasel words, you know. Theme means something different to everybody.
Now scene. You're working on a scene. Yeah, exactly. And it's not working for them. I mean, you write a whole bunch of different scenes, obviously, in a novel, but some of them come nicely and readily, and others we struggle with. So what is your advice? You're struggling with a scene. Is there some, high-level advice you can give as to working with a scene that isn't really cooperating? I mean, would you say throw it out? If it doesn't want to be created, don't force the issue, rethink it?
I think a lot of people have problems because they don't know what it is they're trying to write, you know? I try to get people to make a step sheet, you know, and then work out the plot on the step sheet before you actually write, before you waste a lot of time writing scenes and, write the book. You know, you can waste a hell of a lot of time. I mean, you can write 40, 50 pages and say, the first 30 I don't need, or throw them out or trim them. Or,
you remind me of the criticism of John Updike. Now, he writes beautifully about nothing. And then there was also Confederacy of Dunces, which, who's the great editor who worked on that book? I'm trying to remember. He was an editor of the New Yorker for a while, too. He just recently retired and wrote the book, I forget his name.
Wasn't he Hemingway's editor?
He was Toni Morrison's. You name a famous writer, and I'm forgetting his name now. And I've even had him. I've talked about him on the podcast. I haven't had him on the podcast. But at any rate, he said that with the Confederacy of Dunces by John Kennedy Toole, it's wonderful writing. It's hysterically funny, but it doesn't say anything. So, and you're saying that there are people who don't really know what they're writing. And I think part of it, I don't know if you would agree with this, James, but part of it I think has to do with sometimes, and I've done this myself, start to write and want the novel to develop organically. I know the characters, and I want them to take control. I want it to come to life on its own. But that's a trap for probably 95, 99% of the people who try to do that, I would imagine, because I think you'd agree there's not too many people who write without some kind of an outline.
Well, I think that's why people writing genre stuff have an advantage. Like if you're writing a murder mystery, there's going to be a murder, there's going to be a detective, there's going to be, the end of it's going to be the murderer gets caught, So it's like you have an outline already, It's when it's the hardest people for me to deal with in my years teaching were the people who wanted to be literary. Because literary isn't like murder mystery. It's not a genre. It's not, there's no such thing as the standard literary novel. We're all different. So
yes.
That was always a problem. People would say to me, "You don't understand. I'm writing a literary novel."
And so what did that excuse them from? It excused them from having a story?
Yeah, right. Excuse you from everything. Right? You do anything you want, literally.
Just appreciate the brilliance of my writing and my vivid characters.
Yeah, right. But I tell you, when you find somebody that writes, really, really well and has a good story, boy, the combination is unbelievable.
Exactly. Let me throw one out there, and then you throw one out there, such as All the Light That We Cannot See. Have you read that one?
I don't know. No.
Oh, God, it's Anthony Doerr, Doerr. He was on the bestseller list for, my God, forever. It was out at the same time as The Goldfinch, basically, and they both just sold an incredible number of books. Gorgeous writing, great story. Tell me, give us a few examples maybe of where it's like great writing, literary, but at the same time, it's a terrific story.
I've had students, that will really write a great story and well written. I've had some really strong writing among some students.
But if somebody says to you, one of your students says, "Give me a few novelists other than yourself," because I would assume you would count as one of them, who puts together a really well-structured novel and stories well told. Who are a few of the novelists you would point to?
I try not to do that.
How come?
Well, I don't want the students writing imitations, I want the students to write their own book. I don't want them to write like somebody. I want them to write like themselves.
Okay, but when you talk about genre writers, if you're a genre writer, it's a formula, right? So
that's right.
So how do you distinguish yourself? Let's say you're a detective novelist or a vampire novelist. Actually, there's not that many vampire novelists, but let's say a detective novelist or a legal thriller writer.
Yeah.
How do you distinguish yourself? What do you think are the hallmarks that they need to establish that makes them stand out instead of just being, okay, it's a formula, but it's a formula plus?
I think the hardest thing for people is to write a gripping opening. That's the hard. Too many books start too slow.
Now, on the other hand, James, don't you agree that, I'll tell you, my experience has been, I'll read a book, in the opening 50 pages, which is an agent or an editor will not ask for any more than 50 pages normally to get started. And those first 25 to 50 pages will read beautifully, and then you see a real drop-off after that. It's like they front-loaded everything to make sure I got to grab this agent's attention, I got to grab the editor's attention, but then it fell off.
Yeah.
You've seen that, right?
I wrote about that in a damn good novel, about the sinking in the middle, how to avoid the sinking in the middle. That is a problem. Most problems come from lack of conflict. It's like, it sounds simple, but that's the problem most people have. The dialogue will be just conversation, and the actions will be, just driving down the road or not doing much. They're not in conflict. One time, a guy called me up, and he wanted me to critique his book, And I said, "Is this the first novel?" And he said yes. And I said, "Well, I don't need to read it. I can tell you what's wrong with it." I started telling him, it starts too slow. You got a lot of characters doing stuff, but the hero doesn't do much. All the same problems,
I love it. How does that happen?
I don't need to read it. I can critique it. I can critique it on the phone. I don't have to read it. I can just tell you. It's so common,
How does it happen that they have a bunch of other people doing things and the hero basically isn't doing much of anything? How does that happen?
That is amazing, isn't it? It's really astonishing. You know what it is they identify with the hero, and they're a writer. And what the hell do writers do? They sit in a room with the lights out, right? With their computer. They ain't doing anything. So when you get a good one, boy, it's for a creative writing teacher, to have somebody come in with a really good book is really a thrill, Like this book I was telling you about, one of my students is writing. It's called Chloe. That the hero's name is Chloe. Well, she's not sure she's going to call it Chloe, but anyway, Chloe is the hero. She witnesses her boss's assistant. She sees her boss's assistant push somebody down the stairs in attempt to kill him, and does kill him. And so, because she witnessed this, they're trying to kill her, and she's on the run from these killers. It's really gripping, really gripping. But most plots that are gripping are really simple. There's not a lot to them. It's that, people try to make things so complex when it's not necessary. The simple plots often are the most gripping.
Is Chloe written in first or third person?
A third. She goes out in the country to hide out with her mother, who lives in a rural area, and a local sheriff gives her a gun and teaches her how to use it. A retired deputy sheriff gives her a gun and shows her how to use it, and it's really gripping. She's got this. We know because it's switch back to we watch what the villains are up to and we watch what she's up to, and we know the villains are closing in on her, right? So it's really gripping, really gripping. But it's very simple. She's out hiding from these guys, and they're trying to kill her. I
agree with you that the most interesting books are, well, getting back to, say, Old Man and the Sea. It's a simple story, but it's beautifully written, and it's tense, and it's, I mean, it's a masterful piece of work. I mean, it's Hemingway really at his best. The reason I asked you about first or third person is I would suspect you have worked with people over the year or had students in your workshop who were maybe stuck on whether they should be writing first or third person, or you were looking at what they were writing and suggested that this might work better in third or first person, what have you. What are your thoughts on that?
I think people write in first person because they're used to it. Like that's what they use first person when they write thank you notes to their Aunt Emma for the Christmas present. So like first person is what they're used to. I would have to say it depends on the story. And it also depends on that voice, is that first person voice interesting,
Mm-hmm. Also, can you write in first person without it being I? That you gotta kind of hide the I some of the time. When I see first person, and I love first person writing when it's done well, but when it's done badly, it is every sentence, or way too many sentences, talking about I. Always writing in the I.
Did you ever notice that first-person books have a tendency to be short? The longer the book goes on, the more tiring that I gets, The more
I have not noticed that, but that's interesting.
You don't see you don't see a 700-page novel written in first person.
That's true. I mean, now that you mention it, War and Peace could never have been done in first person.
That's my favorite book. I've read War and Peace, I think 3 times. And that's the only book I've ever read where I'll finish a chapter and say, by God, damn, that was a good chapter. I think I'll read it again before I go on. Never in any other book.
Well, it's widely considered the greatest novel ever written.
Well, it's in competition with the other one he wrote, about the woman.
Anna Karenina?
Anna Karenina. Boy.
Yeah.
There's another one.
Yeah.
Great book.
So, to the aspiring novelist, true or false, James, it's essential that you write every day.
I think that's a good advice for anybody,
Because you need what? You need rhythm. You need flow. You need to build momentum. Does that kind of summarize it?
I think that when you're writing every day, when you're sleeping or when you're eating or when it's going through your mind, If you lay off a few days, it's no longer playing in your head in the background,
I agree. What are your thoughts on dialogue?
Did you say you're living in North Carolina now?
No, I'm in Northern California. I used to live in North Carolina.
Huh?
I used to live in Charlotte, North Carolina for about 5 years. I was there. I used to live in Portland too. That's why I know Powell's books.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
I know a lot of writers in Portland.
It's a great city.
I've had a lot of writers published that I taught in Portland.
What about dialogue? What do you say it's been so long since I've read How to Write a Damn Good Novel, and I know you address a whole host of issues. What do you tell people in terms of dialogue? What are some of the things that need to be kept in mind when writing dialogue?
I think the main thing you got to get through people's heads, dialogue is not conversation. It's conversation in conflict.
So is all dialogue, it has to be conflicted?
Yes, yeah, it's all conflicted.
Really?
You never have people just talking. There's nothing in a novel, there's nothing anybody can say that's so interesting that it's going to hold a reader, except if it's in conflict.
Well, and I would also argue that the worst advice given to writers is write like people talk. People talk boring. You don't want to write like people talk. You want it to be kind of otherworldly or extraordinary in some way, or, as you say, conflicted. And there you go. You know, when I think about it, now that we're having this conversation, my favorite novel ever is Don DeLillo's book, White Noise. And there are so many conversations in there that are conflicted conversations. They're really colorful characters, and so on. But there's conflict, even very subtle conflict at times between husband and wife or what have you, and certainly between father and son or father and daughter. You know, Elmore Leonard is always cited as a guy who wrote dialogue like he invented it. I don't know if that's the case or not. He wasn't my favorite dialogue guy, but there's no arguing with his success. You know, you say it's all about the who in your book. You say it's all about the who. Elaborate on that. You're not talking about the rock band.
It's all about character. Character is like extremely important. Did I lose you?
No, I'm here. I'm listening. I'm trying to give you airtime here.
We had a good time in North Carolina. I really enjoyed it being there. I enjoyed the people. I liked the people a lot.
When were you there?
I had a boat there. I had a boat in North Carolina. We used to go visit the boat. You know, we'd go for a few months, and then we'd live on the boat. And I enjoyed it a lot.
Were you on the Outer Banks or the Inner Banks?
No, we're in the Inner Banks.
Okay.
Yeah.
Did you get some?
The Outer Banks.
Oh yeah, yeah.
The Kitty Hawk Museum and stuff. You know, we visited it there.
You must have gotten some good writing done there. It's got to be, you know, that the coast. Any beautiful coast like that is inspiring to creativity. Now you say it's all about the who, and you say character. Elaborate on that. What about character?
Boy, I don't remember.
I got another one for you. Let that one cogitate.
I wrote this book in the early 80s. You know, what's that, 50 years ago?
Yeah, but that was probably your manual as well for the workshops, right? I mean, you were working off of that. Whether I don't mean explicitly working off of that, but you also write about the tyranny of the premise. What about that?
Oh, yeah. Well, I went into a lot of detail in that book about, you know, they call people write about the theme but I got this idea of premise from Lejos Egri, who wrote about it in terms of playwriting, and I applied it to novel writing. And the idea of a premise like leads to, it's like almost always leads to, like kleptomania leads to happiness. Something like that. You know, you have this premise that you can put it's like the shortest possible summary of your novel, and that premise is something that that tells you some important facts, like if you read a scene and it's about winning a race. A foot race, you say, well, wait a minute, that's got nothing to do with my premise. You know, it allows you to determine what's included and what's not included in your story. So it's like the shortest possible summary that you could make of your novel.
James, what about point of view? That's another thing you write about in How to Write a Damn Good Novel. Now, you wrote it in 1984, but I read it in 1985 probably, so it's been a long time for me. But point of view is referred to by writing instructors all the time, and that's one of the things that they say writers consistently screw up is point of view. What do you have to say about point of view?
Well, I think that when you write a novel, say you pick certain characters to be point of view characters, and certain characters are not point of view characters. So, like, I would say you wouldn't want to have more than 4 or 5 point of view characters. Maybe only one, but the point of view character is like you're in their head. You know their thoughts. You know what they're seeing and what they're hearing. And you don't want to have every character. In the old days, in the previous centuries, every character was a point of view character. They'd tell you the point of view of the doorman. Every character was a point of view character. And then later on, the idea was that you only would have a few. And it's considered that the kind of identification that the reader has with point of view characters is much stronger than with non-point of view characters. If you're in their head, you can identify with them more strongly.
So within one scene, should there be a singular point of view, or is it okay to have a shifting point of view within a scene?
Well, there are people who write these books on writing that say you should always be in only one point of view for a scene, But I don't think that's true because, like in War and Peace, you'll have 2 or 3 or 4 points of view in the same scene,
So it obviously works. It can work if it's done right.
Yeah, right. A lot of I talked in the How to Write a Damn Good Novel about the pseudo rules. There's a lot of pseudo rules that running around that aren't. Everything has changed since I wrote that book because now you got this internet publishing. And anybody can publish a book, put it online. It changes everything when you can write a book, pick a cover, and put it up online. You don't need a publisher.
Exactly. A lot of self-publishing going on. And what about, though, do you feel like that has broken things open to the extent that there's a lot more freedom? A lot of these pseudo rules are disappearing because they're not being run through all these filters that say, no, you can't do that. You have to sound like a novelist. You can't write that way.
I know some guys that I worked with years ago. One of them was Tim Jones, his name is. He was writing a book years ago, and he could never get the ending. It was really interesting. It's a story of a kind of a loose cannon. The guy's he shoplifts, and he's a kind of loose cannon kind of guy. He could never finish it. He could never find it. He could never figure out an ending. And I kept telling him, just end it. What the hell with it? Just end it. But he put it up and he online, and he has a lot of readers. He gets a lot of readers. Word of mouth. People read it and they like it. And
how do you feel about? My favorite novels are open endings. They're not a definitive ending. I always feel like an open ending leaves you something to think about and to talk about with other people. I'm the same way with movies, where I like an ending that allows some interpretation rather than it was this guy who killed that guy. And so now it's over. And we know all the answers to all the questions, and there's nothing really to talk about.
Okay, you and I can fight about this, because I think you should have an ending.
Okay, here we go. Conflict. This is what we need. Conflict. So we're at odds here. Go ahead. Tell me why.
You have conflict. It rises to a climax, and the climax is the ending. And I think that if you're going to have satisfied readers, you're going to have a satisfying ending.
Well, you know what? You're with 90% of the population, I'd say, because almost every movie put out is a definitive ending. For that reason, I think people feel unsatisfied without having a bow put on it at the end, where I tend to feel just the opposite. Well, I feel like the opposite.
Yeah. Boy.
I feel the opposite. I feel like leave me something, don't hit me over the head with it. Leave me some interpretation, leave me some conversation to be had afterward. But I'm obviously in the minority because you're right. what really sells out there is the definitive ending. Now, in your book, I'm talking about How to Write a Damn Good Novel. Your first one. That's your the one that started the franchise. You say rewriting, and then rewriting, and then in parentheses you say the final agony. Talk about rewriting a little. Talk about rewriting a little bit.
Well, I think that it's a really great thing if you have a good critique group that you're in, and you get people that critique your writing, critique your story. It's very helpful. And rewriting is really, if people have problems with it, it's answering the problems. It's fixing the problems.
There are some people, I would say, and I find myself falling into this sometimes, that the rewriting is actually more enjoyable than the actual writing. You first, you produce the raw material.
There are people like that.
They like the editing. Really they like the editing better than the writing.
Right. There are people like that.
But then there's people who are so inclined towards editing, and this is almost everybody, I would say, James, that they edit while they write, which is not a good thing to be doing, correct? You need to put the editor on the shelf and allow yourself the words to just flow, and allow the bad word, allow the cruddy writing to come out, and then pass judgment after the fact. Don't adjudicate and write. Don't write and adjudicate at the same time. Is basically what I'm saying. Would you concur?
I agree with you.
How do you write? Talk about your method. Talk about your style. I mean, were you a guy who sat at the same desk every day? Did you go to coffee shops? How many hours did you put in? Can you give us some insight?
Right now, I've been writing How to Write a Darn Good Romance.
Oh wow!
Yeah, I'm almost done with it. It's darn good instead of damn good.
Darn good, yeah. You tried to soften it up a little, huh?
And I really had a kind, that. Okay, get ready for this. If you count the number of individual books, I'm not, how many, like, print runs for individual books. Romance is 50% of the book market.
Are you serious?
Yeah, 50%. 50% of the books are romances.
What kind of romance are you talking about? Are you talking about like Harlequin, or are you talking about higher level than that?
Yeah. Higher level. That's a high level. Yeah, Harlequin.
Now, they are very short books, right? And they're very formulaic.
Yeah. They're 60,000 words, 70,000 words. Yeah. And they're formulaic.
99% who reads them. It's 90+% women who read them. Is that right?
I took a class in romance writing because I wanted, I had people writing romances in my classes, and I wanted to know what this is all about. I took a class in romance writing, and the people in the class read an average of one romance a day.
Wow.
A day. They used to have at that time, they had a bookstore in Hayward that sold only romances. And I went there, and people would come in with shopping bags full of old books to sell as used books, and they would come out with a shopping bag of new books. They had a newsletter, and people would check off on about the new books coming out. People would check off on the newsletter which ones they wanted. They'd turn them in, and then the customers would come in the bookstore, and they'd have the shopping bag full of books that they had ordered, that they had ordered off the newsletter. And, they would come in with the appetite for romances is, the readership is voracious. It's unbelievable. They have actually found that people reading romance novels produce endorphins like athletes get when they run. Endorphins in their blood from reading romance novels. It's like an addiction. They're addicted to these things.
It doesn't get any better than that for a writer, James. If you can actually get the endorphins flowing. I mean, aren't we always trying to motivate people, to move people, to inspire, to help them develop in some way. And here, romance writers are doing it. But it's formula. Grant, it's amazing.
Grant, in romance writing, the husbands of romance writers are their managers. They invest their money, and they manage their career. Yeah, the husbands are like managers. I went to a romance writers convention, and one of the romance writers' husband said, you really like country and western music, so he started a town called Branson, Missouri. Branson, Missouri, these auditoriums for country and western music and stuff. Mm-hmm. That's owned by a romance writer. She owned the whole damn town.
That's amazing. Yeah. That is amazing.
Yeah, they're extremely formulaic. They're more formulaic than mysteries. They're really formulaic.
Yeah, that's my understanding, is that they will actually send you the formula. They'll say, here's the formula, now just follow that.
Here's something I remember from my experience in the romance writing class. I wrote this opening for this romance. And in the opening, the heroine is going to marry a guy, and she has a crazy aunt that they don't want to come into the wedding because she's kind of a nut. So she takes her intended out to this house where this crazy aunt lives to introduce him to her, as a courtesy, even though she's not invited to the wedding, right? Mm-hmm. So they arrive at the house, and this is my story, right? I'm reading it in this romance writing class. They arrive at the house, and the hero starts up the front stairs while she's getting the luggage out of the trunk, and the door opens, and he hesitates. And I said, "Well, what do you think? You think this guy's the hero?" And they all said, "No." He hesitated. He showed fear in a situation where, wasn't really a fearful situation, so he can't be the hero. I mean, they have that kind of an idea of who the hero of the romance novel is, They have a fixed idea of what he's like. And what he's like, he's fearless. That's what he's like. And I went, wow. And they all agreed, can't be the hero. He hesitated. Boy, I thought, wow. And you'll see if you read a bunch of them, the hero is the same book after book after book. He's like very much the same.
Well, they're being monogamous, I guess. Coming back to the same man. Might have a different name, but he's the same cut of cloth, same DNA.
I think it's sort of like the ideal. It's like the detective in the detective novels, the same book after book after book too.
Yeah. Like Travis McGee is Travis McGee, time and time again with John D. McDonald. But I will tell you, James, that if you haven't read A Key to the Suite, which is not a Travis McGee novel, this is one that John D. McDonald wrote that is, he just decided to strike out and do something that was non-genre and more literary, and man, is it a beautiful piece of writing. It's called A Key to the Suite. And there are writers out there who are genre writers who end up breaking out and write what they really want to write. They write their genre stuff to make money, to get published to make some money, and then they write the other stuff that is their heart. That's at the heart of their instinct.
I met John D. McDonald.
Did you really? What was he like? He lived on a boat like you did, didn't he?
He did, down in Florida. And I saw where he kept his boat. And, in his books, the hero lived on a boat. And a friend of mine showed me the slip. This fictional character had his boat. But I saw him, John D. McDonald, he taught a class at UC Extension in San Francisco. And I took this class. It was a short thing. I think it was like four meetings or something like that. Did
you learn a lot from him?
I don't remember. I remember I liked him, and he was a likable guy.
Well, he was so often referred to as, a master storyteller. And I don't know, when it comes to genre stuff, I sometimes wonder and think, can you really be a master storyteller if you're writing genre? But on the other hand, like I say, I've read a couple of his other things, like Condominium and A Key to the Suite, and which is not genre, and the storytelling is exquisite. So the guy had the chops. There's no question about it. I mean, he's revered for good reason. I'm glad to hear he's a nice guy too, because so often you hear about people who are not good in person.
In the old days, I used to go to all kinds of writers' things, and I met all kinds of famous writers, or met them, briefly,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Did you have a favorite? Did you ever get drunk with one of them? Like you had a chance to get drunk with one of them and tell stories?
God, his name slips my mind, but I did. It's Squaw Valley, I met a lot of. I taught at Squaw Valley for 30 years, I met a lot of well-known writers at Squaw Valley.
The book I was trying to think of earlier, and the editor is Robert Gottlieb. He wrote a book called Avid Reader, which was his memoir. Robert Gottlieb, who was with I think Simon and Schuster, and then was the editor of the New Yorker. I think he was with a couple different publishing houses, but he worked with all kinds of great writers, including Toni Morrison, John Kennedy Toole, and so on. So, James, I still don't know, what is your work style? How do you, when you're writing, when you're in writing mode, are you up in the morning sitting at a desk writing, and how many hours do you put in? What's your style?
Nothing like that. After breakfast, I put in a couple hours, and then break for lunch, watch a movie. I'm addicted to movies, so see a lot of movies.
Do you do you handwrite? Do you work on a machine? Do you work on a typewriter? On a machine?
Yeah. On a computer, yeah. I have a Mac. Yeah.
You know Pete Dexter, who wrote Paris Trout and won the Pulitzer Prize for that, and he wrote
I read
God's Pocket. Yeah, he also wrote a book called God's Pocket, and which is a district in Philadelphia, and they even made a movie out of it. And but he used to say that, because he was a full-time columnist for the Sacramento Bee, and it's like, well, you're a successful writer now, and he said, yeah, but writing is 2 hours in the morning, and that's what he do. He put it like what you're talking about. He put in his 2 hours in the morning. He wasn't going to write for all day, although when he went to work, he was a writer at work as well. So he decided, I'm going to keep my day job, write columns for the Sacramento Bee, and he's one of those guys I'd love to get on the program. I hope he's okay. I think he's still alive. I don't know if he's well. Love to get him on the program one day, because he's we talk about a macho writer, and a guy who writes with a lot of testosterone, but also a lot of grace. He's the dude. He's one of those dudes. James, thank you for taking the time. I really appreciate it. And
it was nice. I love talking about books.
I can tell, and so do I. That's why I do this.